This episode of We Are Libertarians is brought to you by Audible.com. Enjoy one free audiobook courtesy of We Are Libertarians. Choose from more than 100,000 audiobook titles, including works by Ron Paul, Walter Block, Murray Rothbard, and the Cato Institute. Audible.com also has audio of radio and TV programs and audio versions of magazines and newspapers. You can get the Audible app on any mobile device or download the audio to your computer. Go to audibletrial.com/WAL or head to WeareLibertarians.com and find the link to get one free month of Audible today.
Welcome to a very special bonus edition of We Are Libertarians. I will be your host for today. My name is Joe Ruiz. I am the managing editor at We Are Libertarians and co-host of the CAP, Culture and Arts Podcast. And if you come across today's interview and you're not familiar with the Wall brand, please check us out at WeareLibertarians.com. Read some of the articles, listen to some of the other shows, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. And if you like us, go to iTunes and subscribe to our show so it automatically updates and downloads to your phone or wherever you listen to podcasts each week as new episodes become available. And while you're there, be sure to rate our podcast, preferably with a gracious and loving 5-star rating. Subscribers equal growth for us, and as We Are Libertarians continue to grow, growth equals money. And money means simply that Chris, Greg, Creighton, and I, as well as the rest of our rotating cast, can devote more and more time to bringing you great content, great personalities, and more importantly, more effort contributing to the growth of the liberty movement in the U.S. and worldwide. So here we go. If you go back to episode 108 of this podcast, you'll hear Chris Spangle, Greg Lenz, and James Neese discuss the ongoing situation in Baltimore, which was sparked by the untimely death of Freddie Gray. In episode 105, Free Range Children, Chris and I discussed an overreach of CPS and some local police in Maryland. We've discussed Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri, and even talked about, with Radley Balco, who's an author, about the militarization of police. But do police always get a fair shake? That's what today's show is all about. The media does a great job of vilifying police. And even in the presence of my special guest for today, I will admit that in my opinion, some of that is warranted. But when a narrative is so big and it's written about our nation's police, it becomes this kind of blanket statement that aims to describe every officer behind every badge. And, as libertarians or people who stand for the individual, maybe we should be against that kind of narrative. So I had this idea. I wanted to sit down with a panel of officers who I knew personally, who I could vouch for personally, that they were good guys, good men of honor, and I wanted to hear their reactions in their words about this growing narrative and where they stand. Unfortunately, most of the guys I contacted were not higher-ranking officers and needed permission to speak with me. In most cases, they seemed unwilling to ask. And most referred me to officers who specialize in PR. And while I respect that, it's their job, it's their livelihood, and they have to follow protocol, I didn't want a PR cop. I didn't want someone who knew the talking points and was trained to answer what I was going to ask in some polished fashion. I wanted real answers from real officers who I knew were honest and good. But one man replied to my emails and simply said, yeah, let's do it. And he is my sole guest here today. In this interview, I will do my absolute best to be fair to this man, who I have a great deal of respect for, while also asking the things that are on my mind and on a lot of Americans' minds as this narrative continues to build in our country. So without further ado, please introduce yourself and tell the listeners who you are, why you accepted my interview, and give us a brief snapshot of what you stand for.
Well, thanks, Joe. My name's Sheriff Brad Rogers, Elkhart County Sheriff, and my office is in Elkhart, Indiana. And it is a pleasure to be on the show today. Thanks for the invite. And I'll tell you, the reason that I accepted the invitation, one, is because I trust you. And secondly, as a sheriff, I feel that all sheriffs should be accessible. In fact, any elected official should be accessible to their public and have difficult questions asked of them. And I believe in that passionately, and that keeps me sharp, but also sometimes challenges me. think deeper on issues. And so I'm very much open to the difficult questions that you might have, and hopefully maybe you'll even get a perspective that you didn't have before from the police side.
Yeah, I certainly hope so, and I will hit you with some questions that might be challenging, but I do hope to walk away with some added perspective, and I hope that our listeners will walk away with that perspective as well. So the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about is one of those personal situations. I was in the car the other day. I had my 3-year-old son in his car seat in the back, and he saw a police cruiser pass by. And he said something to the effect, it blew my mind. He said something like, "Look, Dad, there's the bad guys. You better be good," or something like that. And I said, "The bad guys?" And we never had a conversation like that in our house. I don't know where that thinking would have come from, per se. And so it threw me off guard, and I asked him, "What do you mean, bad guys?" And he said, "Well, those are the guys that handcuff you and beat you up and take you to jail." And so I had this instinct. My first instinct, I guess, was to correct him and to say, no, they do that to bad guys who are doing bad things only when it's necessary, but not to good people. And then I thought about it, and I thought about all the stories you hear about nonviolent drug offenders or just nonviolent offenders in general being arrested and imprisoned, taken away from their families. And I thought about the 7 years that I did in social services and some of the stories that I heard where I saw kids pushed into foster care, because maybe their parents had a little weed and they ended up in jail or something like that. And so I thought about all these stories you hear about nonviolent people being arrested and families being wrecked, and I just thought, well, now that I think about that, how do I find the balance? Like, how can I honestly give him an answer that's not a lie or something made up that we're just supposed to tell our kids, but at the same time encourage him that police are supposed to be here to help us and be our friends. And since I consider you a friend and you're also a parent, and you have been one longer than I have, I know you take this very seriously. Can you give me any advice, parent to parent, as far as how I can explain this stuff honestly?
Well, that's a great question, and certainly I empathize of the type of question or the statement that your child gave, and the predicament you're in that situation. So I guess I would look at it a couple ways. One is, first of all, he's probably getting a perspective from either media or something that, obviously the media tends to sensationalize things that bad cops are doing, and I'm not suggesting that's wrong. I'm just saying that there seems to be certainly enough fodder out there for the media to catch on to, and yet there's certainly laws out there that kind of evoke some confusion among some officers, and particularly officers who want to stay true to their oath of office and uphold the Constitution. And there's a delicate balance between trying to intervene for a potential victim and the balance of the rights of parents and raise their kids the way they want to, and so on and so forth. I take the approach of, quite frankly, if a child is not being harmed, physically harmed, emotionally harmed to the point where they need medical attention, that we're typically not going to get involved. And, again, does that mean that a child who's not molested but doesn't need medical attention? No, I'm talking about, obviously that's a serious situation, a molestation of some sort or whatever. But, I've been called to houses where a 16-year-old said, my dad's beating me, and I say, where's your injuries? And there were none, there were no bruising, there was no blood, and I guess who am I to say that a father or mother decides to discipline their child a certain way, assuming that there's no injuries?
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I think there might be less problems in the juvenile system and juvenile miscreants if there was a little bit more discipline that occurred out there. And I don't mean that, kids getting beat and things like that. I'm just talking about appropriate types of discipline for the ages of the child, and depending, of course, on what they did. And the parents seem to be so scared today to do any type of corporal discipline that a timeout or this and that may not be effective in all cases. So again, I kind of take it back as, who am I to say as a law enforcement officer that a parent doesn't have a right to discipline their children? Where they cross the line is where you have extensive bruising, broken bones, a laceration, would be considered serious injury, that we've crossed the line now into what most everybody would view it as abuse, and so when it involves the Protective Services Department, we as law enforcement officers or peace officers try to have a delicate balance there, that they may overreact. We try to come in and say, wait, listen, this isn't quite as bad as what you're playing it out to be, and we provide that balance. And the DCS people, they're not law enforcement. They need us to help them enforce things like taking child into custody and so on and so forth. And we don't take that flippantly. It's a very serious matter, and we take it on a case-by-case basis. Certainly somebody who had, for example, the example you gave, a little weed, wouldn't be, in my opinion, somebody who we would take custody of a child for in those situations. Somebody who's making meth on the other side on their kitchen stove next to the macaroni and cheese that they're going to feed the kids, that's maybe another matter.
Yeah.
And again, that isn't necessarily a permanent removal of the children, but obviously they have an addictions issue. They have an issue that addiction is so compelling that even though they love their children, they'll do anything, including put their children at risk. And so for public safety and for the children's sake, we need to take some action on that. So I guess back to your child, I can certainly empathize the situation that you're in, and I would suggest that maybe you could balance that and say, kind of like with any other profession, there are some bad apples out there, and there's some guys, but I tell you, we have some good people and good leaders that are trying to get those bad apples out, and for the most part, you can be assured that if you need help, if you're lost or you need somebody to intervene on your behalf, most police officers are going to be a good choice to approach, and you're not going to be in any jeopardy in that matter. So it's undeniable that we have issues in the law enforcement community, and I do a great work to try to make sure that character and integrity and service are central to our core values in this department, that those type of things aren't going to be happening here.
That's good. That's one of the things that I was going to ask you about, and you kind of already answered that. Is do you acknowledge, or would you say that all cops are good, or does corruption exist within law enforcement? You kind of answered that question without me even having to ask.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's a lot of corruption, and more importantly, I think there's lack of training, there's lack of emphasis on character, lack of emphasis on integrity, and we were talking about this the other day in the department that before we would use deadly force, those of us who've been on the department many years, if it was just hand-to-hand type of situation, we'd take a couple of good belts in the face, and have some, a bloody nose or bruising before we would opt for deadly force. And it doesn't mean that, depending on the circumstances, if the guy had a knife or something like that, but if it's just hand-to-hand, we do everything we can to avoid using deadly force or a higher level of force. And so it's one of those situations that even though you might be justified in some parameters of the law, you really are trying to avoid to use deadly force at the very last thing. I mean, it's just one of those things that you're going to try to handle it as a man and a cop and because really the last thing, some guys will talk big, but the last thing we really want to do is use deadly force.
It's funny that you use the word in some parameters of the law, and it reminds me of, and I'm going to out myself a little bit here, when I worked in residential with kids who were, I worked with, at one point, a group of kids who were ages 15 through 18, and their primary reason for being locked up was they were thugs, I guess you could say. They were oppositional defiant, and they were just lawbreakers. They stole, they fought in school, they were truant, they, in some cases even raped. And one of the things that was said in our facility was that you're not able to put your hands on a kid unless they are a danger to themselves or a danger to others. And there came times when they were presenting a danger to the environment, which is not one of those things. And I don't mean like Greenpeace. I'm talking like they're throwing chairs in the middle of the room where all of their peers are sitting, and they're trying to incite some sort of fight between all of the other kids or something like that. So then they're creating a dangerous environment for everybody to be in. And at sometimes we would, then take them to the safe room, which was a room where we close the door. There was no lock on it, but you would hold it closed until they could calm down and pull themselves together and talk with you about what was going on. So there were times, and I'm going to out this, that if we put them in the safe room and they began to walk back toward us, even though at that point they had not taken a swing at anybody, we would just close the door, and you could say on the paperwork, well, they had charged at us, And so it was like a half-truth. It worked within the parameters of the rules that we were given, and it enabled us to justify it on paper enough to calm down the situation. But it wasn't really what it was, if you were being honest. And so I guess where my question's going is, since you used the words like parameters of the law within the parameters of the law, do you think there's times as police where those kinds of events occur, where you're so frustrated with an ongoing situation or an ongoing person in the community who you're being called to them or whatever, that some people might look for a way to justify it on paper?
Well, no doubt that in some places that could occur, but I think that's something we certainly discourage. When I talk about the parameters of the law, I'm talking about, for example, you might have a guy with a knife, and it might be justified to shoot him, but instead we use a taser.
Okay.
So the deadly force may be justified, and if it was used, it would ultimately be justified. But is that necessarily what we need to do? So
if a person had a knife, and you mean if they were trying to use that knife to harm you?
Yeah, for example, maybe there was a chair or a table between the guy with the knife and the officer. And, does he have the ability, and is the officer in jeopardy? And so, can he jump across that table quickly and get to the officer? Very likely. And so if there was a movement towards that end, could the officer shoot him? I would say yes, probably. But in a case like that, when you have some time and distance, could there be a taser involved, and we take him in custody without using deadly force? So there's things like that are within the realm of law that the officer could be viewed as justified by the criminal justice system. But we encourage officers to use the less restrictive route, the less amount of force possible to either take someone in custody, or they may not even have committed a crime yet. They're just kind of like maybe your example at the juvenile home, that they're just a danger to themselves, or the way their conduct is. It's it's reckless, and they could hurt someone or hurt themselves. And so you may end up taking them to a mental facility for a 24-hour evaluation because of maybe their addictions or something like that. So it's the variables are wide and it's kind of hard to pin each one down just by talking about it.
That's fair. I just I heard those words and it kind of triggered that memory, and I thought I would ask that question. But one of the biggest complaints that libertarians or anybody who's an advocate for like limited government, whether it be libertarian, conservative, or whatever, one of their biggest complaints about police is that when our government makes stupid laws, the police are the front line that are there, or it's their job to enforce those stupid laws. And so then, when a law creates kind of a criminal class out of a nonviolent person, police are supposed to be the ones to come in and enforce those things. So how do you reconcile doing what you feel is right with, what the law tells you that you have to enforce?
Well, that's a great question. It's sometimes it's a real fine line, and sometimes I'm not even sure that officers always feel good about it, even if they are put in a situation where they have to enforce stuff. But it's one of those things that what we have to sometimes get away from is the term law enforcement officer, and I like the term peace officer, and we try to keep the peace and try to seek alternatives to incarceration in some cases. And we do that with traffic offenses. For example, we could incarcerate somebody for driving while suspended or even possession of marijuana, but oftentimes we will just give what we would call a traffic citation or a complaint and summons, and they appear in court. So in lieu of incarceration, it's just almost like a traffic ticket. And the officers do have discretion, and so whether it's carrying a handgun without a permit, and it's a citizen that is obviously up to no trouble. It's not 2:00 in the morning in an industrial area where there looks like they're burglarizing places, things like that. They do have discretion as to enforcement of laws.
It seems like every day on Facebook, there's a new video that somebody with their camera phone has taken of a situation with a cop and someone and they didn't feel like what was happening was fair, and it incites all sorts of comments about whether or not what was happening was justified. You have been, I think, in favor of the body cameras. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, tell me what the status on that whole thing is.
Well, first of all, let me just say that, you're absolutely right. There's lots of camera. Everybody's got a camera. I mean, if you have a cell phone, you have a camera, and so we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. And I always view that as a good thing. I think that police officers should not be concerned about themselves being recorded. If you're doing the right thing, don't worry about it.
If I get pulled over because I was speeding, and my first instinct is to go for my phone and make sure that it's ready when the officer talks to me, is that a bad thing? Is that reasonable? Is that something that's going to trigger the officer who's coming to check on me? Especially if it was something that I was doing that caused them to pull me over anyway. I'm just wondering, like, in what situations is that going to not work in my favor? Even if I'm just trying to protect myself and the officer.
I'll tell you, with the officers in my department, it better never work against you.
Okay.
I would say that I can't speak for other departments or other states, but I can say, again, if the officer's doing the right thing, he shouldn't be bothered by the fact that you picked up your cell phone and is now recording the incident. In fact, in our case, of course, you're being recorded.
Right.
So for him to be upset that you're recording is kind of ridiculous, because we're already recording the situation, not only through the in-car camera behind the dashboard or behind the windshield, but also his body camera, which is on his probably his chest or vest area, and
do they have those now?
They have those now. All those have been issued around the 1st of December, and those are high definition video cameras as well as audio. So wherever they are basically wherever they go, the camera goes with them. And right now, they're integrated into the in-car video cameras. So, for example, if an officer does a traffic stop or he's on an emergency run and he turns his emergency lights on, it also activates the wireless body cam as well.
Oh,
so
good.
if he's in an excited state or something, he's getting out of the car and he forgets to turn on his camera, it's already on.
It can detect that.
And it just it's the same manufacturer, and they both turn on at the same time. And then you physically have to turn the camera off if it's going to be turned off. And you might say, well, why should he have that discretion? Well, we need the discretion. For example, if he's going to go use the restroom, or just different practical things. But for our policy, it's basically the camera is on if there's any contact with the public.
Okay.
So if you're in contact with the public, whether it's a vehicle identification check or a traffic stop or a traffic crash, a domestic violence situation, you reported a theft of your bicycle, that just count on the camera is going to be on the body cam. And it's not for it's not to be Big Brother. It's not. It's really for evidence. It's for evidence value. For example, a domestic violence situation, it's really helpful to have the state of mind, the emotional state of mind of the victim at the time of the first officer contact, and contemporaneous with the assault and exactly what's happened and what she's thinking. And so those are things that are helpful for evidence. But obviously on the other side of the coin is it helps ward off any false allegations of complaints that the officer may have used profanity or was inappropriate or anything like that. And a lot of times people who try to file those false complaints, once they realize that the officer was on video and we have the audio and video on hand, they usually say never mind. So it helps the officers in that regards. From a practical side of things, it does kind of keep the officers held accountable in the sense that they know they're being recorded, and it's helpful in that sense as well. If they had a propensity to use profanity, for example, or other being unprofessional in any form or fashion, it helps to keep them in check, and that's just human nature. The problem with body cams is that, like with any videos that are taken from the public side of things, is it's only one view, and although it can be a very damning view, admittedly, we have to be careful about jumping on the bandwagon that someone is guilty of this or someone's guilty of that, because it's just one element of it. For example, my body cam may be facing forward, but I'm actually seeing what the threat is off to my side in my peripheral vision. And I could take appropriate action, the use of force, but the camera never picks it up. Likewise, if you're seeing something that's on a camera, like say from a citizen's viewpoint, and what you didn't see prior to that recording starting is the officer getting pelted with rocks, for example, and the officer uses some type of force as a result of that, and you didn't see that first initial part of it, again, you're missing a component. So that's why it's important that the body cams are not a panacea. It's a good tool, but it's not a panacea. It's good that we still have the grand jury process. We still have the evidentiary process, the statements of the witnesses, statements of the officer, and so on, because it's not the whole big picture.
Are you wearing a body cam right now?
I am not.
Being recorded?
I'm not.
Okay, I thought it might have been
show
good
you one
bonus content. Put it on YouTube or something like that.
No.
Again, this is Joe Ruiz with We Are Libertarians, interviewing Elkhart County Sheriff Brad Rogers, talking about police body cams, talking about the narrative of police brutality and government overreach that seems to be building in the country, and just asking him a few questions. Back to body cams, I recently was on a jury, and in this situation, they attempted to use the dash cam in the officer's cruiser as evidence during this jury, and it seemed like it was almost unusable, because every time you would turn, the thing would fade in and out. There was a lot of white noise. You couldn't really make out what the woman was saying. Anytime something would happen, something came over on his radio, that seemed to cut all the audio on the dash cam off, and all you could hear what was happening on his radio. And so it seemed like a really inconvenient, almost unnecessary thing that couldn't even be used in this courtroom. And it didn't help the prosecution. And if anything, it helped to kind of give further reasonable doubt on behalf of the defendant, because we couldn't hear what the heck was going on. And what he was claiming that she made some rude remarks to him in the car, but because the audio was so terrible on this dash cam, we had no idea if what she said is what he said she said. So, I mean, in terms of these body cams, and you can talk about the dash cams as well, how can we be sure that they too won't end up being ineffective and just really expensive? And, if there are those bad apples that you said, in serving as police in some cases, could it conveniently break or momentarily go offline and end up being worthless in front of that jury?
Well, that's a good point. And really it's a management issue, making sure that, one, we're firm and consistent throughout all of the calls, and if you have tendencies, for example, that officers would periodically shut off their camera or whatever, and that we need to be monitoring that and make sure that it's not inappropriate. The other side of it is that we're dealing with technology, and just like you setting up today, there's always glitches, there's always issues, there's always potential interference when you're dealing with wireless situations. I mean, the fact that there was white noise or static was better than no noise, which would indicate that maybe the officer turned it off,
right?
Like he was trying to hide something. So, I mean, how can you blame an officer for something that there's some interference being caused? It's technology, and that's just kind of the part of the beast that we're dealing with. But as technology improves, those things are improving, and I certainly can't vouch for the officer's video that you had in a jury. I'm not even sure if that was my department or not, but it was those videos are improving. The technology with the wireless microphones are improving. But again, it's not a panacea. For example, things can happen off of because it's looking out the windshield of the vehicle. So if it's away from or side of the car or something like that, you might still have audio, but you won't have video. That isn't necessarily the officer's fault, because he might not be able to control where the action's going. The body camera, of course, is self-contained on the body. There's no wires attached to anything except for the little microphone that's on the body cam. But you have power, and then you have the recording media that's on there, and that has to be downloaded to a hard drive or to a DVD at a later date. But we had an officer that was involved in a fight. He was getting ready to arrest a drunk driver, and the guy turned around, smacked him in the head, and as his hand came around, it knocked the body cam off and disconnected it from its power source. So once again, it's we have to be reasonable here and looking at what the officers can control and the type of hazards we're dealing with. So in this case, it's reasonable that the officer couldn't help that his use of force, essentially, because it was initiated by the suspect, was not on camera, and it couldn't be helped. But that doesn't necessarily.
The footage show the gentleman smacking him.
It showed, I think, the initial aggression, which would help, of course, but it wouldn't show that, if, for example, if there would have been any allegation that the officer's use of force was inappropriate, which we didn't get that, but if it was, we wouldn't have it on video. So again, it's not the panacea. The other things that in regards to body cameras is they can't pick up things like training and experience that the officers. For example, I may be just getting ready to arrest you, Joe, and as I put my hands on you,
I wondered bringing this stuff in, asking these kind of questions, if I'd even leave with my audio equipment.
If you all of a sudden tense up that tells me that you're getting ready to resist, and we could push you away and deploy pepper spray or a taser or something like that. But again, that's not shown on video. So there's different things that we're trained to recognize that may not be shown on video.
Is there any reason, sorry to cut you off, but that a person might tense up just because they're scared of what's happening?
Well, there is. But, tensing up in and of itself isn't necessarily a reason that we would use force. But, for example, if I'm trying to bring someone's hands around to put them in handcuffs and they're physically resisting, you may not be seen on the camera, but again, the officer would say, "Quit resisting. Put your hands behind your back. Quit resisting," and it's important that the officers verbalize those things during the situation. Experienced officers will do that. Hopefully, as we train officers, there'll be more and more utilize that concept, because, quite frankly, verbalization is very important. Not only so that the person who's getting arrested or who's the focus of the enforcement is clear on what needs to be done, but it also you're talking to the video as well.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
Baltimore has been in the current events. You mentioned it during sound check. So you've seen the footage. People are rioting, looting, fighting, burning things down, and essentially destroying their city. And they're trying to get a point across that they think wouldn't be heard without all of the violence that has been on the news in previous days. So you see this police force fully decked out in this SWAT attire. Some police were even, despite being geared up like that, they were still seriously hurt in these situations. And, I guess, how do you feel about the people of Baltimore and how they've handled this situation with the homicide of Freddie Gray? Which I guess today, if you haven't seen it, I guess it was, the court did support today that it was ruled a homicide. So that's why I say homicide. Yeah,
but that doesn't necessarily mean a murder.
Right.
Homicide.
Tell me the difference in those.
Well,
the
homicide is when there is a death of somebody that could be a criminal incident, or it just could be situation other than natural causes. So it's one of those situations that, as far as I can tell, the investigation's still ongoing, or at least all the details haven't been released on it. So I certainly can't comment on that. It's certainly, anytime you have a situation like that, it's a little bit, you wonder about those kind of things. But I certainly have to, as I've promised my own people, that I have to make sure that I suspend judgment until all the facts are in, and make sure that we get all sides of the coin that's coming in. But I'll tell you, the situation in Baltimore is unfortunate, in that it appears that we have leadership that is trying to not appear that they overreact with the police, and I see that in one side. On the other hand, the police are being held back, or at least initially they were being held back, so that they couldn't take care of business and actually take out the offenders that are actually committing criminal violations. Nobody is going to, at least nobody that has got common sense and is in a leadership position that respects the Constitution, is never going to be involved or interfere with people who are peacefully demonstrating. That is something that we all highly respect, or most constitutional leaders will highly respect. And so the fact that you have a peaceful demonstration to air grievances is to me, is not a big deal. What is the problem is when you start having criminal violations, where you have either buildings being burnt, you have windows being broken, you got rocks and bricks and bottles being pelted at police. It is concerning that they're being held back then. And I know some officers had protective gear, others did not. But again, we're kind of in a catch-22, and I've heard libertarians talk about this, that you have you have the over-militarization of the police.
Mm-hmm.
And I just actually went on YouTube and watched the 1965 Watts riots in Los Angeles. And they had some old footage there. And you had police in riot gear, and I'm telling you, it looked like they were over-militarized to me.
Do you think that when they're dressed in the SWAT gear and they have these military-style vehicles, do you think that adds to the narrative that people are saying about them?
Well, probably. But, again, I did a column on for example, the mine-resistant vehicles that some are getting. I'm kind of against that. I personally think it's not something practical that we would use, and it's really probably a money pit in keeping it up and maintained. But I think that it's not so much the equipment. I think that the media can sometimes sensationalize the appearance of the police, but I think it's more of what happens with that equipment that people are most concerned with. So, for example, Boston, when the Boston bomber occurred during the marathon, they came and they started doing house-to-house searches,
right.
Unconstitutional searches. I would never do something like that. And of course, in conjunction with that, they had their what you might call military gear on. Well, the military gear was to protect them, but they violated people's constitutional rights, in my opinion.
Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, exactly. And so, we didn't find the guy until actually we released the curfew.
Mm-hmm.
Or when I say we, the people of Boston, the leaders there, released the curfew, and the people helped us find him. So we need the people's help in this, and what we got to get back to is really. Sir Robert Peel said, the police are the public, and the public are the police, and we're the servants, mm-hmm. not the masters. And we need to keep that perspective about us. And so when our guys might have protective gear on, that's really what it is. It's protective gear. And I've heard this over militarization stuff, and I get it in some form or fashion. But quite frankly, if you're going into a riot and you got bottles and bricks and things like that being pelted at you, quite frankly, you want protective gear.
Sure.
And
yeah.
You don't want officers being badly injured and to put them out of commission. You want the officers to win in those situations because you want them to be able to maintain peace. You want them to be able to quell the disturbance and get the troublemakers out. Not the people who are peaceful, not the people who are maybe on the peripheral that are not causing any problems. We're talking about the troublemakers, and oftentimes those are probably it could be some miscreants from the area, but there could be people that are coming in that are causing problems and have another agenda.
If the situation in Baltimore or any of these other situations happened in your jurisdiction, how do you think you might have handled it differently, if at all?
Well, as sheriff, I firmly believe that a sheriff sometimes needs to get out in front of things, and we as leaders, whether we agree with certain things or not, we need to make sure that we're out in front of it and communicating to the public and to the media. And how we do that will have a big factor on how things are handled in the community. But one of the things that here in Elkhart County that we've taken great strides on is making sure that the leadership in the community, and that includes the sheriff, are meeting with officials, or not necessarily officials, but meeting with the community and helping them to understand the role of the sheriff, the role of the police, and sometimes me encouraging other police departments and police leaders what the true role of police should be. And that is that of the servant. So as we go along here, like tomorrow, I'm meeting in Elkhart with some civil rights leaders in downtown Elkhart with the chief of police of Elkhart, and we're going to talk about civil rights. And it's one of those things that some leaders would be uncomfortable in talking about, but it's part of what I do, and we want to make sure that people are comfortable in this community. And if we do have a situation that occurs, they know, or they can maybe trust, hopefully, that the leaders in place are going to take swift and appropriate action to either bring someone to justice, including if it's their own officer, or at least communicate to them what is the facts that are going on, so that they have the facts at hand. What people seem to do is see a video or see a segment of something and then jump on the bandwagon, and then it just snowballs out of control. And what we'll do is if something like that would ever happen here, God forbid, we'll do our very best to stay ahead of it.
Okay. You talked about the curfew in Boston, and I know that they've established a curfew in Baltimore also. Do you think? Is that okay for the police to tell people when they can and can't exit their homes? Or
well, typically it's not the police who generate the curfew. It's usually in our case it could be, or in Baltimore and Boston's case, it would be the mayor or the city council, or even in the county level, the county commissioners. And although the sheriff could certainly recommend something like that, I think that as we talk about things like curfew, it's a little bit different than martial law. Martial law is, of course, basically a suspension of the Constitution, and I'm not sure if I know any time that I would agree with martial law.
That's interesting, because when I saw what was going on in Baltimore, my first thought was, this is martial law, isn't it? Because what would happen if people did come out of their homes and disobey the curfew?
And I think it was probably martial law in Boston, because obviously they suspended the Constitution. They went into houses. They went in. They didn't care if they said, no, you're not coming in. They're going in. Mm-hmm. That to me is a suspension of the Constitution, and that's not right. And as long as I'm sheriff of this county, that's not going to happen.
I feel like the tyranny always lives in the words "or else." It's always like there's the law, and here,
I agree.
But it's what will happen to you if you disobey that law, where that
exactly
lives.
It is actually terrifying to see that, especially see it on a grand scale such as that, and to know that really it's not going to do any good. It's tyranny at its best. It is going door to door, people in fear of the police, people like your son who would be in fear of what the police are going to do, and quite frankly, it was to no avail. I mean, you didn't turn up any suspect,
right.
And only after they released that curfew or martial law were people allowed to go out, and then they found the suspect. Mm-hmm. So it's those kind of things that are just not very helpful. Now in Baltimore, to place a curfew in effect, I think could be prudent at times, particularly with mass mobs and so on. But I think it has to be done with caution and with respect to the Constitution. Obviously, if you have peaceful demonstrators and so on, I'm not sure that's going to be necessary. But
right.
But when you have basically all hell breaking loose and the chaos of mass rioting, I could see city leaders setting up a curfew. And the problem is, how do you enforce something like that? It's going to be, in most cases, probably unenforceable. But I suppose it gives them the police some reason to arrest when you have no other reason to arrest, which some would say that's not good either. But here we're not talking about someone who, a mom and dad out with their stroller at 10 o'clock at night. They're not looking for those type of situations. They're trying to get the troublemakers off the street. And in this particular case, they felt that that martial law, or not martial law, but that a curfew was something that was necessary. I don't know how helpful that was.
You've talked a lot about this, police being servants, and so you've probably already answered this question, but I want to hear kind of the fast response, the yes or no. So not questioning the police. Think about the federal government, the big government. Should the people fear their government?
Yes.
Okay. Should the government fear the people?
Yes.
Now, since police on a smaller scale are a subset of government, should the people fear police?
Well, if they were the federal police, I would say yes.
Okay.
On local police, there's more control. And the reason I say that is and I've had firsthand experience with things like the Bureau of Land Management, the Food and Drug Administration, the Department of Justice. When I went out to Nevada, I saw what the BLM was doing out there.
That was at the Clive and Bundy Ranch.
Yeah, the Bundy Ranch. And by the way, I don't. I'm not suggesting that Bundy was entirely correct or anything, but quite frankly, I think that the American people are tired of being governed at the point of a gun, and the federal government, who has no face, who has no accountability system. It's not like if you have a problem with a federal agent, you know who to call. If you have a problem with a sheriff's deputy, you know who to call.
Right.
And I'm accessible. So it's
this interview is proof of that to anyone who would question it.
And so there's a difference between federal agencies who have sometimes a myriad of alphabet names and no name to a sheriff's deputy who can be held accountable at a local level. Same way with probably similarly is the city police. So it's one of those things that I guess being feared. I mean, it's kind of like when you go down the street and you see a cop car coming towards you and you lift your foot off the accelerator.
Happens to me all the time.
I do the same thing, and
so you're not exempt from that.
Exactly, and so it's one of those things that that's am I afraid of the police? No, but I fear what they could do, and that is they could write me a traffic ticket or something like that.
They could inconvenience your time.
Exactly.
And wallet.
So those are the types of things I'm kind of talking about. Now, on a federal level, I think that a real fear of them is important, but they don't fear the people, at least at the federal level. The sheriff is an elected official. He's the highest elected law enforcement officer in the nation. And he answers to the people and to the Constitution. And I don't mean by the people and mob, because this isn't a democracy; it's a republic. So he answers to the people and is held accountable to the people. So whether it's the media, Joe Ruiz, whatever, this is the accountability system in place, and I respect that, and I think it's important that we keep the sheriff in elected office.
It's funny because you say, an elected official is more accessible and they're easily held accountable, but some of our congressmen or women, some of our senators, I try and express concerns to them, and all I get back is maybe a postcard that doesn't address anything that I had asked about. It just says, thanks for contacting us, and when I call them about serious votes, 9 times out of 10, they don't vote the way that I ask them to vote.
Well, I guess when I was talking about elected officials, I was talking about me.
Okay.
So I would agree that
that's fair.
I have elected. That's the way I envision elected officials should be.
Okay.
And so I'm with you that.
Why do you think they're not?
Part of it is they don't want to be held accountable, and they don't like the questions.
Okay.
So, for example, they'll swoop in, they'll swoop out of an event. They'll give their 2 cents at an event, but they swoop out with their bodyguards, and it's like they might shake a few hands, but they don't have time for questions. And
I can say from experience, it happens at debates too.
Yeah, well, but you see, that's why I like going to the forums. I like going to different places that even. That I may not see eye to eye with their philosophical or political way. If I'm invited and they want to hear me speak, they may not even like what I have to say. But quite frankly, I'm the sheriff of everyone, not just conservatives or libertarians.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to look at it. One last question to wrap all this up. If you could tell everyone in America anything that you wanted about police, about your friends, your colleagues, the people you serve with every day, what would it be?
Well, I think that it's important to know that we're humans just like everybody else. I put my britches on the same way you do, Joe, and I have kids that I go home and spend time with and play games with and go to volleyball games with, and it's... we all have our lives, and we come to work, and we want to do a good job and serving the public through the core values that we have here at the Sheriff's Department, with respect and integrity and service and resourcefulness. And it's important that as the leader, it's important for me to be the example of my line staff and to set the tone and to set the constitutionality of our service to the community, and then also to be kind of a banner and a spark, hopefully, that will light a flame, the passion in others to do that as well. But we're human beings. We make mistakes. The Founding Fathers knew that quite frankly, elected officials would make mistakes. That's why they wanted everybody to take an oath of office, so that we would, even though through those mistakes, and we even have evil men sometimes come into public offices and so on to destroy the Constitution. But if all of us that are in that public service would keep our oath of office and to protect and uphold the United States and in our case the Indiana constitutions, so help me God, that would that the Constitution would live on, and we would carry on with the freedoms and liberties that we all want. And so it's those kind of things. My battle is to keep officers tuned in, to keep them aware of the constitutionality, and to make sure that we're not just law enforcement officers, and it's just, it's a law is a law is a law. That's not the case. We can make a decision whether it's constitutional or not. We can not enforce something, and I've been chastised for making decisions on, for example, not enforcing some gun laws or future gun laws, and their oath of office doesn't say anything about that.
Yeah.
It says upholding the Constitution. So we'll continue to work on that and to try to continue to train our staff to continue to uphold the Constitution and head towards that vision. And then and just remember that we bleed, we are mourn and sorrow when one of our officers dies, or if officer is killed in the line of duty. It impacts the whole community, because it shakes the foundation of what our community, most of our community, will look at as being protectors and being there for people who we call and people who we can trust. And I do my very best to make sure that we keep the bad apples out of the department.
If people wanted to reach out to you somehow, how would they go about that?
Well, I'm excellent in being viewed in social media. I'm big on social media, so Bradley D. Rogers on Facebook. I also have a Twitter account, but through email, brogers@elkhartcountysheriff.com. I'm very accessible through email. If you send me an email, hopefully within a brief time, I would get back with you. It's one of those things. I get probably 100 emails a day, so it takes up some time to sometimes answer some of those. But it's very good to get me through that. And then if we need to touch base, like for example, you need to talk with me personally, we'll set up an appointment or make a phone call, whatever. But I'll tell you, if you come in off the street and want to see the sheriff, and I'm available, you're going to see him.
Well, we are Libertarians. We're out of time for today. We certainly appreciate Sheriff Brad Rogers' time from the Elkhart County Sheriff Department. We hope that this episode was able to give you a little bit of perspective as far as how a police officer would think about things, as there's such a heated narrative that's growing here in the United States of America and in the world. Brad, thank you for being a part of this today and agreeing to sit down with me. It's always nice to talk to you.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, and for you people on social media, we would really like, if there's anything that maybe we didn't ask him, feel free to email him or get a hold of him in the ways that he suggested. But also leave in the comments when we post this on our Facebook wall or on our Twitter @WeAreLibertarians. Just let us know what you think. What questions weren't asked, what maybe should have been drilled in a little bit harder. Is there anything that you thought, wow, like that, I hadn't really considered it from that viewpoint before? We want to hear all those kinds of things. And as always with We Are Libertarians, even though there's no one here to complete my sentence, we promise to do better next time.